By the end of season 2 of The Crown, we had closed out a few major plot lines. Margaret got hitched, finally. Philip made it clear to Elizabeth he has been faithful, and Elizabeth popped out her last child. Season 3 of The Crown series gives us a fresh start, a whole new cast that will take us right up through seasons 3 and 4. It's 1964, and Queen Elizabeth's checking herself out in the new official stamps. She's comparing her old profile to her new profile, and she's like, whoa, so much time has passed. Her private secretary tells her everybody loves them. They're a perfect transition from young woman to awkward pause. Old bat, Elizabeth interjects. Her corgis give her private secretary a disapproving glare as we have a close-up shot of our new queen, Olivia Colman. It appears that there's a spy at the top of the British establishment, and everybody has their suspicions, including Prince Philip, of course. While watching news of the election for Prime Minister, Philip tells Elizabeth that he thinks the spy is Harold Wilson, the most popular candidate. Then again, Wilson's a threat to the monarchy, so maybe that's why Philip doesn't really like him. Elizabeth's response is that if this was the case, MI5 would never have let him through. What changes her mind is what her most trusted unofficial advisor, the former Prime Minister Winston Churchill, tells her. Winston says Wilson once asked permission to visit Russia on behalf of the Board of Trade, which he found shady. Elizabeth's like, crap, Philip mentioned that whole Russia trip as well. Now both my boys think it's Wilson. Turns out they're wrong. Wilson, now the Prime Minister, is not the spy. According to the head of MI5, the spy is, of all people, her art curator, Anthony Blunt. She's like, what? She'd already given Wilson some major Elizabeth attitude at their first meeting, so now she's just embarrassed. She's also infuriated that the spy isn't just close to the palace, he's literally inside the palace. He's an actual member of the royal household. According to the head of security, though, they can't do a damn thing. We have to protect the integrity of the royal house. And if everybody finds out we let in a spy, we'll look like jerks. She just has to continue on as normal and just live with the dude, as though nothing happened. Talk about an obnoxious roommate. On top of that, she has to talk fondly of the guy at an art show. Elizabeth can barely hold in her anger. Philip handles it differently, because he's Philip. Philip pulls him aside at the art show and calls him a snake and says, I will be watching you. Blunt counters Philip's threat and says he may or may not have those portraits of Philip, linking him to that whole sex scandal from last season. If you don't expose me, I won't expose you. Philip's stuck. This guy is free to go. In real life, none of this was exposed until 1979. Within a few years of Wilson's election, the country is financially screwed. Despite a major bailout from the US, we'll get to that later, they devalue the pound, meaning everybody's money is now worth less. And people are not happy. They're like, enough is enough. Someone's head needs to roll. Wilson blames the military blames Parliament blames Lord Mountbatten, Chief of the Defense Staff. According to Wilson's cabinet, he's gotta go. Wilson thinks it's a bad idea, though. Mountbatten's trouble, and he's well connected. It's better to have Mountbatten inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. But he lets him go anyway. Unfortunately for Wilson, Mountbatten really is well connected. The head of the Daily Mirror, Cecil King, already fed up with government, along with a few of his henchmen, decide the Prime Minister had no position getting rid of Mountbatten. They come up with a plan. They call Mountbatten in and they're like, okay, hear us out. We've decided to get rid of the Prime Minister and replace him with, oh, who can we find who's free? Oh, you're free. No, Mountbatten says. And at first he wants nothing to do with this, but later pulls a 180. He warns them, this is going to be impossible unless we have the support of the Queen. While this treachery is all going on, Elizabeth's in Kentucky, USA. Little known fact, the Queen has a side gig breeding and racing horses. After her horse did poorly in a race, her buddy Porchy suggests they go around studying the latest trends to up their game. And it's kind of turned into a vacation away from the palace. Elizabeth even says to Porchy over dinner, if I hadn't been queen, this is what I would have loved to do every day. Her fantasy is interrupted when she's called back to London to handle the coup. Back to work. Pissed off that her vacation was interrupted and pissed off that Mountbatten tried to organize a coup, she lets him have it. Enough with this nonsense. He responds, "The Prime Minister is destroying the country and we're not going to do anything?" Elizabeth tells him, "Doing nothing is exactly what we do." Doing nothing might have been the right move here, but not so much in an event that happened earlier in the season. A catastrophic mudslide hit the town of Aberfan. It enveloped an entire school where it took the lives of over 116 children. Naturally, everybody expected Elizabeth to head to the site and console the families. Elizabeth's like, "I can't do that. Chaos follows me wherever I go. They need to focus on the relief." This doesn't sit well with the Prime Minister. When he tells Elizabeth to step it up, she's like, "What would you exactly have me do?" And he's like, comfort people?" This is new to Elizabeth. She doesn't understand how that would help anything. I mean, she's kind of always struggled with giving affection. She tours the site and meets with the victims' families, but struggles to show any kind of emotion. When greeting the victims' families, a little girl presents her with flowers, a gift from the remaining kids at the school. Yeah, heartbreaking. And what I really wanted at this point was for Elizabeth to just get down and wrap her arms around the little girl. But of course she doesn't, and instead the girl dips into a deep curtsy. Elizabeth walks out of the house to the crowd waiting for her and fakes a tear. Once back in London, the Queen confides to the Prime Minister that the people were right. They deserve compassion and empathy from their Queen. Elizabeth wonders, how did I end up like this? She says, "After World War II ended, my parents and I visited hospitals and they wept. I didn't. When my grandmother died, nothing. I know there's something wrong with me." The Prime Minister then tells her that her absence of emotion is a blessing. We don't need hysteria from a head of state. We barely need humanity. This was the closest Elizabeth has come to questioning her absence of emotion, and immediately she is reassured that this is what is expected of her. Charles, heir to the throne, was clearly going to struggle with this whole concept. One of his first huge acts as heir to the throne is to spend a few months in Wales getting to know Welsh culture and history before giving a speech to the entire country. And at first, he hates it. He's not a fan. And the people there don't seem to like him much either. He has trouble fitting in with his classmates, and he just thinks the whole trip is pointless. He's like, what does it matter? I'm going to say whatever the monarchy tells me to say anyway. Charles's attitude changes when he's at dinner at his professor's house. He notices a picture on the wall of the dining room. He's like, "Oh, that's pretty." The professor explains it was taken in the town where him and his wife met. Charles says, "Oh, well, I should go there and visit during my tour." The professor shows Charles a picture of a lake and explains the British government flooded the town to create a reservoir to supply water to England. Charles is like, I got it. I know exactly what I'm going to write my speech about. Connecting with this whole idea of Wales having their identity oppressed, he writes his speech. With what seems like all of Wales watching, he says Wales has her own character, her own will, her own voice. Once back at the palace, nobody's waiting. He goes to his mother, wondering, where's my job well done? And it's clear she is one person who isn't happy with his speech. She says to Charles, "It's clear the inference you made between the Wales' suffering and your own. This crossed the line. And not just because you indulge your feelings. The most important part of what the monarch does is remain neutral. It's better not to speak, think, or feel." Charles responds, "Yeah, well, I'm not you, and I have a voice." Elizabeth says, "Sure, a voice that no one wants to hear." This is a major conflict between Elizabeth and Charles. She sees just what a monarch needs to be, and Charles isn't that. If anything, he's going in the opposite direction. When it comes to his romantic life, it only gets more tricky. Charles meets the person that will change his life forever, Camilla. And she seems cool. Too bad she's in a relationship with Andrew Parker Bowles. Well, off and on. They hit it off right away. He invites her to Buckingham Palace for dinner, as you do, and over dinner she asks him, "What's it like living here?" He replies, "Normal." Yeah, right. She responds, "None of this is normal. Come on. Especially not normal is being Prince of Wales." He talks about feeling free yet imprisoned, and the fact that at any moment it can all change. He is waiting to be king and all. A man enters and presents Camilla with a card. She looks at Charles and is like, oh, for me? She opens it and poof, a bunch of fake paper butterflies are flung out and smack her in the face. They laugh. This sets the tone of the relationship from the beginning. Fun. And on top of that, Charles can freely open up about things he normally wouldn't. According to his sister, Princess Anne, though, just fun is the way it should stay. She is the first person to tell him, don't take this girl seriously, she's trouble. She reminds Charles that Camilla's still all about Andrew Parker Bowles. How does Anne know this? Because Anne herself is also involved with Andrew Parker Bowles. Yeah. She's like, Charles, let's keep this the right way around. Us playing with them, not them playing with us. None of what Anne says matters to Charles, though. He's convinced Camilla likes him too. And when he mentions to Lord Mountbatten that Camilla's the one, Mountbatten's like, ah, crap. I mean, Lord Mountbatten was the one that told him to sleep around, so now he's got to fix this. Camilla isn't exactly virgin princess material. Meeting in secret, Lord Mountbatten meets with the Queen Mother, and the Queen Mother's not impressed with Camilla either. So they come up with a plan. Lord Mountbatten will send Charles off with the Navy, and the Queen Mother will use her social savviness to get Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles married. Bing bang boom, no more Camilla. First, they've got to get Elizabeth on board with the plan. Something these two conspirators don't know is just how much Elizabeth knows about Camilla and Charles. Before her uncle, the Duke of Windsor, passes away, he gives Elizabeth the letters Charles had written to him expressing his love for Camilla and how determined he was to be with her. Elizabeth knows what Charles can be like when he's passionate and what the consequence could be if he's denied the person he loves. She refuses to go along with their plan. So then, the Queen Mother has to call in the one person who could change Elizabeth's mind, Princess Anne. They summon her to Buckingham Palace. Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Philip, and Lord Mountbatten are all sitting in a row in a darkened drawing room in Buckingham Palace, and it really sets the whole conspiratorial vibe. They tell Anne Charles wants to marry Camilla, and Anne responds fine. Camilla does like Charles, but she's obsessed with Andrew, and Andrew isn't going anywhere. Elizabeth reluctantly gives the Queen Mother her blessing to follow through with the big plan. Get rid of Camilla by marrying her off to Andrew. In fact, according to the Queen Mother, the date for Camilla and Andrew's wedding has already been set. The two lovebirds just need to be told of this. And this actually happened. In real life, Camilla's parents announced the engagement before they were actually engaged, so Camilla and Andrew had no choice but to go through with it. Charles finds out about the engagement while on Navy duties and is heartbroken. While Charles is having an early life crisis, Philip begins to have a midlife crisis. During a television interview, he complains that the royals deserve a raise. Otherwise, he's going to have to give up things like polo. Obviously, this doesn't land well with the public, and he gets trashed by a journalist. Philip has to find a way to fix the situation. So he decides to make a documentary about his family, hoping he can portray them as more normal. At first, the cameras just catch them meeting dignitaries and sports celebrities, and this doesn't seem too normal, so they attempt another approach. Let's just film ourselves watching TV. While being filmed watching TV on the couch, just like everyday people, the director of the documentary instructs the royal family to look a bit more happy. Laugh, have fun. It's a normal evening. Margaret responds, as she would, if this were a normal evening, we'd all be on our own in sad isolation in our own individual palaces.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you.
Something the cameras don't catch is the Windsor's new flatmate, Princess Alice, Philip's slightly senile mother. Nobody notices her because Philip does everything he can do to hide her, as he does with all of his family history. When Philip was a kid, his mother, Alice, spent time in a mental institution and eventually made her way into a nunnery. Philip didn't know about her struggles and went along with what everybody told him, which is that she's crazy. When she's brought from her nunnery in Greece to Buckingham Palace to escape war, he stashes her in the corner of the palace somewhere, hoping the documentary people wouldn't see her. The documentary airs, and it does no favors for the royal family. In fact, it's a complete embarrassment. So Philip has to come up with a new idea. He has to find some way to make the royal family seem down to earth. And it's like, who's the most down to earth person in the family? Anne. He tells Anne she needs to do an interview with that same reporter who had been critical of his TV appearance. She's like, sure. But instead, she goes behind Philip's back and gives the reporter Alice instead. Having spent time with Alice, she knows if there's anybody anyone would want to read about, it's her. The interview starts off as expected for a royal princess. Born at Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria was present at my birth. But when she gets to the part about being diagnosed with schizophrenia and treated by Sigmund Freud, he's like, oh, this is going to be good. He starts the tape recorder. I have always been fascinated by Philip's mother, so when they decided to put her in the show, I was like, thank you. Apparently, the British public was also just as fascinated by her. The article comes out, and Elizabeth and Philip read it together over breakfast. Philip's shocked. He had no idea just how wrong he was about her, and he goes to see her. He stands at his mother's bedroom door, and he reads aloud from the newspaper. Princess Alice has suffered more than the rest of us, worked harder than the rest of us, and created more good than the rest of us. As someone who has always been about courage, he's in awe of just how she could have survived all that she has. She grips her cross and tells him, I had help every step of the way. She questions his own faith. Philip has never really been a faith person. It's just not something he ever really thought much about. He's more about straightening yourself out with some good old physical exercise. Sometime after his mother passes away, a group of priests come to Windsor Castle and they ask Philip if they can set up a seminary for priests who have reached midlife and lost their way. Kind of like a midlife crisis. Philip's like, yeah, fine, whatever, and kind of mocks them even. Unbeknownst to him, he's having his own midlife crisis. He gives a speech that makes him contemplate his own aging. He pushes himself a little too hard playing polo, and there's even a scene where he's flying his plane. He looks up and sees the moon and immediately thinks of the astronauts up there, having recently watched the moon landing on TV. He takes control of the aircraft and flies dangerously high above the clouds in order to get as far up as he can go. The co-pilot, now freaking out about how dangerously high they are, says they've pushed the plane to its limits, and Philip responds, yes, but look around. We've lived. Lucky for Philip, he doesn't have to go all the way to the moon to see the astronauts. They're expected to come to Buckingham Palace. He even gets some alone time with them. As they say, though, never meet your heroes. They're coughing and sneezing, and Philip's just kind of surprised at just how little they seem to have been affected by their journey to space. He asks them, what were your thoughts out there? I think he was expecting something truly profound, because when they respond, well, we didn't have much time to think. We were too busy with our duties. He seems bummed that they didn't have the answers he was looking for. Post-meeting, Philip is still searching for some higher meaning. What ends up getting him out of this funk is something that he would have never expected. Church. The very place his own mother found refuge when she too had a spiritual breakdown. He swallows his pride and goes to that seminary located on the grounds of Windsor Castle to speak with the priests, the ones he originally mocked. He puts his ego aside. He opens himself up to what they have to say and realizes that when it comes to faith, the most important thing you can learn to do is ask for help. The last major character who I haven't covered yet is Margaret. Margaret spends most of her time in the palace, throwing back drinks and smoking cigarettes. Her husband Anthony spends most of his time trying to avoid Margaret. When Elizabeth sends Margaret to the States on official duty, Elizabeth suggests Anthony go with her. After a long day of engagements in Los Angeles, they end up back at their hotel room, drunk. Margaret jokes about what a nobody Anthony is, and Anthony calls her a pygmy princess, a jab at her height. I mean, calling her names is pretty common for him. He reminds her that it's not easy being second fiddle to her all the time. If anybody should know anything about being second fiddle, it's Margaret. She reminds him that this trip was one of her only moments to shine. Elizabeth calls Margaret in the middle of this trip to beg for help. She needs Margaret to make a detour to Washington and somehow convince the president for a bailout. The UK needs money and the US has it. Margaret's like, I got this. At dinner with the president, she drinks a little too much, tells dirty limericks to the president, and even talks smack about the late JFK, which makes the president laugh because I guess he never liked him anyway. At one point, she's dancing on a chair, singing, having a good time, and then plants one on the president. She gets the money. So it went well. When she gets back to London, she gets no thanks from anybody. Elizabeth loves the fact that she got the bailout, but wasn't a fan of just how Margaret she was while on royal duties. When Margaret asks for more royal duties, Elizabeth is like, yeah, sex jokes with the president? Absolutely not. To top it off, Margaret's marriage suffered because of the trip when they had to skip Anthony's art show in New York in order to go to Washington. Their marriage is really on the rocks now. Anthony takes up with another woman, and since Margaret's only sense of purpose is derived from being with a man, she finds one elsewhere. While at a party, she hooks up with Roddy Llewellyn, and they have a great time. So much fun that she whisks him off to the island of Mystique, Margaret's favorite place to go when she wants to escape the palace. They're on the beach when a photographer snaps some scandalous photos of them, and they end up in the paper. The Queen Mother summons Margaret back to the palace. Now Margaret's really done. Her family's over the scandals, and her husband is like, yeah, I'm out. To top it off, her boy toy Roddy sees the chaos that goes on wherever she goes, and even he's out. The next thing that happens is something the Crown leaves open to interpretation. Margaret takes too many sleeping pills and has a near-death moment. Nobody knows if it's a suicide or an accident. Elizabeth finds out and is distraught, and she goes to see Margaret. Elizabeth says to her, "What were you thinking?" Margaret responds, "Honestly, I have no idea. I don't remember." With tears in her eyes, Elizabeth tells her, "If you wanted to show me what my life would be like without you, you've succeeded. It would be unbearable." Margaret realizes that even though Elizabeth has deprived her of royal responsibilities and the love of her life, she has given her the one thing she wants the most, someone who needs her. Margaret then asks Elizabeth if she's going to her Jubilee. Elizabeth responds, "What's the point? The country's in turmoil. We're bankrupt. Since I've become queen, I've accomplished nothing." And Margaret tells her, "You are the one to hold all of this together. While everything around you is in turmoil, it is you and your stability and calmness that keeps things working." The last scene of the season, Elizabeth attends her Jubilee, marking her 25 years on the throne. She walks out of Buckingham Palace and climbs into her gold carriage. Prince Philip smiles at her and takes his place in the procession. As the carriage starts to move, she turns around, making sure her heir is following close behind. In the background, we hear the words the poet laureate wrote to commemorate the occasion. "For our monarch and our people, united yet and free, let the bells from every steeple ring out loud the Jubilee." Blackout. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this.